Hi friends, Tom the Swamp King here with something a little different today. I actually wanted to go through my early experiences with, as you can probably see from the screen, Star Wars Destiny, which is a new card slash dice game from Fantasy Flight, collectible, and it's very interesting to kind of see this game go through the early stages of like figuring out what the metagame is. I just thought I'd share my experiences with you with this, what I'm going to call red-yellow aggro. So the first thing that I noticed when people were getting into the game is a lot of people were kind of doing the same thing. And a lot of that was these kind of double elite teams, or single elite and then one other with lots of upgrades. If you play the game with just the starters, you definitely see the power of dice. Rolling more dice means you do more damage, you get more resources, you can play more dice. And so you just develop this big kind of death ball of dice. And that's all well and good, but I figured like there's so many of these events out there, cost 0 and 1. There's got to be a way that we can kind of do something different. We can attack on a different angle. And the first card that really jumped out to me as being kind of very oppressive, very powerful in that kind of archetype was this card, the Best Defense. You do get one of these in the starter, in the Kylo starter, and every time I played it, particularly early on, it just felt ridiculous. You know, you're removing 2 of your opponent's ray dice, and that might be, 2/3 of the dice pool that they're rolling that turn. And that advantage that you get early just kind of compounds later on because they, weren't able to play more dice early on, and then they get less dice later. So this card really jumped out at me as being very powerful. So what I wanted to look at was a list where we didn't necessarily go for powerful synergies between our characters, but really we just tried to remove as many of our opponent's dice early, and basically try and play our hand every turn and get little increments of immediate value, because events often you get a lot of the value out of them immediately, as opposed to dice which come later on or get value over turns, particularly with supports, or with some dice where you need to invest more resources into them, such as cards to reroll, or actions. When I use the term resources, I'll likely not just be talking about money strictly, but money, resources, cards, actions, all these things kind of fold into one. So, when I looked at the kind of card pool, the Best Defense is a villain card. So we're going to build villain, and when I looked at the card pool between red, yellow, and blue, it kind of jumped out that I wanted to try like rainbow. I wanted to try playing all 3 colors because we can play the best events in every color. What I found very quickly is that whilst blue is great, and there are a lot of fantastic mono blue decks out there, a lot of the good part of blue is that the upgrades are very powerful. Particularly cards like Force Throw, Immobilize, Force Choke in Villain, Mind Probe to a degree, but they just have some really good upgrades. Excuse me, I'm a bit sick, so... So blue has a lot of very good upgrades, but in terms of the actual events, other than Enrage, Intimidate, and Isolation especially, within the villain sphere, those are the only ones that are really good. And Enrage is kind of replaceable economy, which we'll get into later. Isolation's a fantastic card, and Intimidate, we have other options. So what I'll do is I'll quickly switch this over to everything, and cut out blue. just going to look at red and yellow. So, given that we are trying to use our best defense and things like that, we want to have a lot of health on our red characters. And we also want to take advantage of a couple of the really good cards with non-unique characters. So originally I was playing 3 first Stormtroopers and 1 Balatic. The logic here is that if you look at all the dice, we only have range damage faces. So this means that we can play upgrades that increase range damage, and we're never kind of losing value off of modifier faces. What I did find is that, and this is certainly a build of the deck that you could go, is that I actually preferred getting more value off of squad tactics. Squad tactics kind of became very apparent as one of the best cards of this archetype. So I'm actually running it with Tusken Raider. Whilst you do lose a bit of the synergy with, in terms of, you've got ranged and melee damage. The Tusken Raider can hit for 3, which is very important. It's a lot of damage. The ability on Tusken Raider is extremely relevant, as it kind of helps you with this action economy and doing more in a compression, like doing more in a smaller amount of time. So it's very important, and I think a lot better than Balatic. It's also non-unique, and we're going to have a lot of non-unique synergy cards in here because they tend to cost less. So what I'm going to go through is what I think is the core of this deck, and then we're going to have some flexible slots at the end, which you can fill with cards that you prefer. In case I don't need to, in case it's not obvious, this is just my initial impressions, and I'd love to get a bit of discussion going about what you think about the card choices and maybe some interesting ones that you've tried or that you'd like to see tried. So we'll go with the upgrades first, and we're going to sort by cost. So as I was saying, we really want to try and go under our opponent. So we want to play a lot of cheap upgrades, if at all. And we want ones that are particularly going to be dealing damage, because we're trying to be very aggressive. We're trying to take out some of our opponent's characters early, so we've got less dice to roll. And the great thing is, red and yellow have some of the best. Red and yellow within villain have some of the best cards for that. We've got the Blaster Pistol, which is 1 cost dice. Half of its faces are damage. It has range damage, which we have quite a lot of. We also have On the Hunt. And On the Hunt is low-key probably the best upgrade in the game, I think. Especially for this deck. It's it's got 2 modifier faces. Because we're playing the Tusken Raider, we can actually use the melee modifier face. And the main thing to keep in mind is with the special face, if at any point our opponent has shields, this just says dealer damage. So it's 2 free 1 damage faces. And also, this second line of text there, you may spend 1 resource to remove 1 of the character or upgrade dice, is immensely relevant. We're trying to trade our our resources, in this case our actual money, for our opponent's dice in order to slow them down. So On the Hunt really allows us to both do damage and slow our opponents down. And you get to choose the dice as well, so it's all around. Like I said, I think this is one of the best cards in the game right now. Best upgrades at the very least. The last upgrade that I think is really core and integral to this deck is the Holdout Blaster. We've got 3 damage faces as well. The resource face is not irrelevant. I also found the shield face not irrelevant as well. The main thing here is redeploy is one of the most powerful keywords in the game. If you're stacking up one guy with a lot of upgrades, your opponent's incentivized to murder them so that you are rolling less dice. And redeploy gets rid of that disadvantage, which is a significant one. And ambush as well is fantastic because we need to try and keep pace with our opponent, particularly in the early part of the turns. Because when we get to the events, you'll see we have a lot of events that are very powerful, but only in particular timing windows. So I'll play 2 of those. We'll go to the supports. The only support that I think is a must play, and it might be a must play in almost any deck that's trying to win through damage, is backup muscle. So for 1 resource, we're going to get 3 damage out of it. It does take some turns, 3 turns to get the full value out of it, but if you look at the just the raw value, you'd take $1 for 3 damage almost any day. Getting through shields as well, this is really important. It stops our opponent from stabilizing when they've taken a bunch of damage, and with 1 or 2 health left, we can kill them through that, which is also something that On the Hunt allows us to do. So chuck those in there. Now, the juicy stuff, the events. So the main thing that we're looking for is events that cost 0 or 1. They're cheap, so that we can play a lot of them, and ones that disrupt our opponents. We're almost playing an aggro tempo game here. If you played Magic before, or other games where those terms mean something. So the key ones here: squad tactics. We're playing all non-uniques. Obviously, if you're playing the Balatic instead, it's only the Stormtroopers. But this is pretty nuts. This gives us 4 actions for 0. And it allows us to set up all of our dice early on. So we can start re-rolling earlier. We can start playing cards like He Doesn't Like You. We can start playing those earlier. And if you haven't seen this card played yet, definitely build this list, because the games where you draw both your squad tactics, particularly early, are not very close, particularly with this list. With the kind of Django double Stormtrooper, it's fantastic in that as well. So if you're activating twice as many characters, it's twice as good, right? Obviously not exact numbers, but this just allows us to get on the board very quickly. It's very important. What else have we got here? Unpredictable. This is it feels like a very staple card. There are very few decks that don't want to re-roll their dice, let alone re-roll their opponent's dice. And it has ambush, which gets rid of one of the biggest disadvantages of re-rolling your opponent's dice, in that you can re-roll them into a good face, or re-roll them into a situation where you can't react to what they're doing. And that's one of the big play points of the game, is you need to be able to react. Alright. Closing the net. So now we're getting into the 1 cost events. And 1 resource is still very... 1 money is very... still very important. We can't play too many of these, because if we draw a hand of 5 of them, we can only play 2 a turn. Barring some economy, but we're going to be pretty light on that. So I think 1 closing the net is fine. This card is very good against the 3 dice lists, or 2 dice, but I don't think there's any good 2 dice lists out there. Very good against the 3 dice list, particularly Vader. He has a lot of fantastic faces. Anytime you can play... essentially, you don't want them to have a blank on the board, because otherwise this card does nothing. But very, very early on, this card is extremely good. Electroshock. I'm currently... I would say 1 Electroshock is core to the deck. The main disadvantage of electroshock is that you need to spot a yellow character, and we're only playing one. So if they do manage to take out our Tusken Raider, and the Tusken Raider can be quite a juicy target because it has some very good faces, very good effect. If he goes early, we can't play our electroshocks. So I think one is fine, but I think the second one is certainly, I wouldn't fault anyone for playing it, and it may in fact be correct. Flank. So this is one of the other big advantages of playing 4 characters, is we can play flank, and it is very good. 1 cost, get rid of any of your opponent's dice, is fantastic. It's has very little downside, other than the negative synergy with squad tactics, but you can always choose not to play the squad tactics and flank them first. So this is one of the other prime reasons of playing the deck. What else? We have Tactical Mastery. I originally started with 1 Tactical Mastery, but it became pretty clear that 2 is fantastic. This card breaks, one of the cardinal rules of the game, where you get to do multiple things before your opponent has a chance to respond. And the games where you play Tactical Mastery into squad tactics are quite ridiculous, because you can start resolving all of these dice that you just rolled, and potentially just blow someone's head off within the first opening stages of the turn. In addition to that, it can also kind of give you a safety net if you do need to take a reroll or something and things don't pan out. So yeah, Tactical Mastery is, I wouldn't say staple to all lists, but to this it's very good because you can get a lot of mileage out of all the actions. And the best defense, we talked about this one before. So most importantly, removing 2 dice means you can potentially remove 2 both of a character's dice, but removing 2 of your opponent's best dice is crippling on any of the first 3 or 4 turns of the game. The 3 damage to one of your characters is not irrelevant, but we are playing 21 health worth of red characters, and there's a lot to be said about spreading your damage out. When I go second, I like to kind of put a shield on a Stormtrooper and a shield on the Tusken Raider, and we can start dealing damage to the Stormtrooper with a shield on it. But we're going to try and mitigate the fact that we are murdering our own characters quite a lot by removing our opponent's dice to make sure they can't attack and easily kill our weakened Stormtroopers. Alright, other than that, that is pretty much the core of the deck. So that's 22 cards. The kind of flexible slots are obviously entirely up to you. What I found is that the 6 upgrades is not enough for my liking. Generally with mulligans with the deck, you will keep any upgrades that you have, unless you have 5, then you probably send some of them back, but you really want to have an early on the hunt or a pistol or a holdout blaster. But 6 didn't feel like enough. So what I'm actually playing is 1 F11D rifle. You'd certainly go for the second if you feel like it. Another option is Comlink. So Comlink is really good, comes into play effect. However, the faces on the dice aren't great. We don't really care about resources too much. The focus is alright, but it's these could just be damage faces. So that's why I'm playing the rifle instead. It also has redeploy, and 4 of its faces deal damage. I'm not sure about playing this over Holdout Blaster. The ambush on Holdout Blaster is just is really important. Being able to go Holdout Blaster onto the Raider, roll the Raider, and then potentially resolve one of the dice is really important. Other upgrades, infantry grenades, I'm not a big fan of. It's just too many blank faces for a 2 cost, and discarding it really kind of feels like it defeats the point of it being an upgrade. Look, if these types of decks do get popular, it could be good for the mirror. You could also consider Jetpack, but because the 2 modifier faces, you risk getting kind of your dice picked off, so it doesn't have that more immediate value. But I wouldn't blame someone for trying it. I've thought about Commanding Presence before, but because it only goes on a red character, you're pretty likely to have that Stormtrooper get picked off. Prized Possession I've thought about as well, but it seems like it costs too much. Everything else is a bit average. Maybe Promotion as well, but I think I just don't think it does enough. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing with the upgrades. But like I said, try some of these other ones out. Probably not Cunning or Personal Escort or Datapad, but there are a couple of reasonable options there. We'll go to the supports. So what I'll talk about with the support slots is more, I think the deck needs a few economy cards just to help it capitalize on some turns where you do draw a hand that contains something like flank, best defense, and maybe another 1 cost action, just so you can play those hands to their full extent. So what I've been playing is actually Drudge Work. So this card seems terrible, and that's kind of why I wanted to play it, because it looks so bad. But quite often you're going to have a Stormtrooper that's taken 3 damage off the best defense. It doesn't have any upgrades, and you'll look at your hand and you're like, I really want to play, this Holdout Blaster and this Electroshock this turn. I've only got 2 resources. So your first action could be to actually Drudge Work, or play the Blaster, then Drudge Work off the ambush action. And that way, even if your opponent's going first and they've already rolled their dice, they can't murder your Stormtrooper before you get value off of it. Because if you try and roll it, then they can just hit it for 4. So Drudge Work seems interesting. The other options are Underworld Connections. So this is a 2 cost where you just once per turn you can gain a resource. The disadvantage here is that you're not going to be able to do anything else the turn that you Underworld Connections. So, especially for a deck that's trying to capitalize on the early turns, it feels like having a resource that gains you money over the long term isn't going to work. But give it a try, see how it goes. The other thing, I guess we should probably talk about this during the upgrades, is Outpost. Outpost is interesting because it has 2 disrupt faces. So that's your opponent losing a resource face. And it has a 2 disrupt face. And these can be important because one of the easiest ways to lose is if your opponent gets a very powerful economic start and they set up like a big character with a lot of upgrades early. So Outpost can help slow the game down. But it also doesn't deal any damage. So maybe give it a try and let me know how you go. Alright, so we'll move on to the events. The first couple that I'll talk about are probably the most important. And I think I would say that it's core to the deck, but I'm not sure on the numbers yet. And that's some amount of interaction with your opponent's upgrades. So the main 2, or the only 2 really, are Confiscation and Disarm. So both have their advantages and their disadvantages. I'm playing it at 1-1 split, and it's feeling good, but it's also dependent on what is around in your metagame. So Confiscation, the main advantage here is that it is immediate. If your opponent has a situation, let's say they have Ray and a lightsaber, and you really don't want them to hit a big damage phase, on the lightsaber, particularly the unblockable, or with Luke, or is it Kylo's lightsaber, the one that deals damage and then lets you re-roll it. If they roll their dice and they roll that phase, you can immediately confiscate the equipment, and it'll be gone. So it lets you react a lot faster. The cost of it, though, is so much higher. Paying 3 for a lot of your opponent's upgrades is pretty big, but it's also a kind of like pseudo-symmetrical effect in that your 3 resources aren't really worth as much as their 3 resources, in a way. You're happy to kind of set them back at the cost of a card and pay 3 resources to have them lose 3. You can also do tricksy things like confiscate their Sith holocron after they've rolled it. You're essentially always using this after they've rolled the dice, because if they roll a blank, then whatever. Disarm is slightly different. So it's costing us 1 at a base, so usually that's going to be cheaper than Confiscation. It's discarding it, which is a big benefit. You're not going to have to just deal with the same thing the next turn. The disadvantage is it only hits weapons and equipment, which is a wide variety of things, but we're going to have to remove a dice to get rid of it. And when it comes to things like the lightsabers or any of those really expensive things, most of them are abilities which we can't hit with this anyway, or they cost 3, in which case we only have our Tusken Raider dice, which can hit that. But that has happened before, so it's not irrelevant. But discarding your opponent's dice, that's exactly what we want to be doing, even if it's costing us one of our dice, and because it's going to cost them more in the long run. Not only are they not rolling that dice this turn, they're not rolling it the next turn, the turn after that. Sweet. So we've got 3 more spots. So what I've been playing in these slots is cannon fodder, 2 cannon fodder. So this goes back into what we were saying with the best defense and spreading our damage. It allows us to stop our opponents from killing our guys that are on low health. We can try and make them actually deal 15 damage before they kill the first stormtrooper, which is big. The other thing it does is, particularly with the popularity of Rey, because Rey is an elite dice that basically can go with any other elite dice, is she had a lot of modifier phases, and also a lot of the there are a lot of melee modifier dice out there, and you get into common situations where your opponent might have a 2 melee and then 2 melee modifiers, so they can hit for 6. But if you get rid of that 1 non-modified dice, then they're hitting for 0. So a lot of the time we're happy to put that 2 damage on one of our other troopers or our Tusken Raider in order to stop our opponent from just straight up murdering one of our guys. We can also use it when our opponent rolls low damage, so they can't reroll into high damage. But I've actually been finding this card really good. I was playing Sweep the Area, but what I found with this is it's quite often Scramble, which is this. But Scramble is terrible. Rerolling all your opponent's dice is, in most situations, not ideal. You can't really control. You're not controlling anything. You're leaving it up to fate, and then your opponent gets the first shot at things. And most situations, if you make them reroll their dice, and they do get all blanks, they'll just re-roll them again. So, wasn't a fan of that. It's very hard to set up a sweep the area for like, make sure you have 2 Stormtroopers up and get their 2 best dice and hope that they don't. Yeah. If you could choose up to, I might come back to it, but I was really just looking for another 0 cost to keep the tempo up, but I think Cannon Fodder is a much better one. A lot of these other upgrades, like events rather, we don't have the right makeup to take advantage of. Arm to the teeth, close quarters, go for the kill. Doesn't impress me, especially if we're playing backup muscle and on the hunt. Especially because I don't think it allows you to resolve it using modifiers. Probe's interesting, and might be. I think Probe's good. I definitely wouldn't fault anyone for putting Probe in the deck. You're always going to play it. You might rip some very important cards out of your opponent's hand. Things like opposing dice removal. Cards like Daring Escape are pretty bad. Daring Escape is really bad for this deck. So if you rip those out of their hand, it could be fairly good. What else do we have? All In. I'm not sure how I feel about All In. I had one in the list for a while, and there was just never a situation where I thought that it would be fantastic. I mean, the dream is like tactical mastery, squad tactics, All In, but rarely is that actually good. Most of the time, you're just gonna like re-roll your blanks and then pass, or like resolve them and kill your opponent. So, not a fan of that one. Award ceremony. I'm just not sure if you want to actually be drawing cards. I guess you are playing a lot of 0 and 1 cost cards, but the chances of you actually drawing all of the ones that you want to play is not so high. Although, in saying that, maybe drawing cards just to use them to reroll is fine. It's definitely worth coming back to that one. I'm playing the second Closing the Net at the moment. I might try switching that over to Electroshock and see how that goes, but I think the second Closing the Net's fine. It's not amazing. Now, going back to the economy side of things, another card you could play is Logistics. So Logistics has the disadvantage of only being a one-off. Has the advantage of costing 0, like Drudge Work, but it also has the disadvantage of having you have to roll a resource face, which in some situations is not as likely as you would hope. But I think this might be the second best one. I think Drudge Work, Logistics, then Underworld Connections, then none of those things. But give Logistics a try if you don't like the idea of exhausting all your characters. Sweet. So that's the list that I'm playing. Some other options for you within the events are, where is it? I thought about including a one of Endless Ranks, but it doesn't seem very good. Nowhere to Run. This could be okay. The main thing being that Stormtroopers have 2 blank faces, and the Blaster Pistol has 2 blank faces. And it could be interesting to include a one-of. My reasoning behind formally including one-of was that on turn like 5 or so, on that like turn where they're kind of just about to start killing your dudes, but you've played like 2 or 3 upgrades, you're quite likely to roll a bunch of blanks, and this could just be the thing that pushes it over the edge. But two reasons is a lot, and as you can see, we're trying to keep it quite low. This is this is our curve. It's 11 0 cost, 16 1 cost, and 3 2 cost cards. So yeah. Other than that, I'd be interested in putting in a third interactive card, so confiscation or disarm. I'd probably lean towards the confiscation. But other than that, we'll just go through the battlefield choice. So one of the key things with this deck is we have a lot of actions to do. Whilst we're trying to compress our early actions to get a lot of value out of them, at the end of the day, our opponents are often claiming when we've got like 3 dice still on the board. So what I wanted to do was include a battlefield that was garbage, where our opponent would rarely be able to get value out of it, and we would rarely be disadvantaged from it. So Command Center is bad. We're playing out a lot of cards very quickly, so every time our opponent claims this, we're actually getting closer and closer to milling ourselves. Echo Base is also very bad because we don't want our opponents to have shields. Everest Throne Room, I haven't actually thought too much about this one, but the vibe that I get is that we are maybe setting ourselves up to just eat one of our opponent's good special abilities, and we can't really take advantage of it either. We've got the F11D special, or the On the Hunt special, but that's hardly the last action that we want to be doing. Frozen Wastes is, once again, if we've got 3 dice out and our opponents are claiming, they're just going to remove one of them, so we lose a lot of value there. Imperial Armory, I probably think half of the decks that I've seen are playing this, and we don't want our opponents getting more advantage out of, more ability to play bigger upgrades, which is where they're going to get their advantage. Jedi Temple, our deck is 2/3 events, so probably not great, especially if you want to like sandbag a squad tactics or a tactical mastery for another a future turn. We'll skip this one. Rebel War Room, especially if our opponents have like Han. Han has a 3 range damage for $1, and we'd rather our opponents pay that. Separatist Base. Separatist Base actually isn't too bad for us, because we get to choose where it goes. But I feel like the amount of times we claim is just, I would say, in the games that I've played, maybe 1 in 6 turns you claim, 1 in 5 maybe. And I don't really want to trade 5 damage for 1. Our last one, Starship Graveyard. It actually isn't too bad. Though, if we're going to be like disarming our opponent's holocrons, I'd rather them not get them back. So, the one we are playing is Mos Eisley Spaceport, because this battlefield is terrible. Returning one of your upgrades to your hand to gain a resource is rarely good. There are only a few situations where your opponent gets value out of it. That's with Holocron, because they'll gain a resource. Or with any 0 cost resource, I guess. Upgrade, rather. Any 0 cost upgrade, they'll get a resource out of it. With Comlink, or any comes into play effect. So, Comlink promotion, the yellow blaster that makes your opponent remove a dice. Any of those, they can replay them, but the key thing with that is that they have to kind of fuck around at the start of their turn then, by playing it and doing the thing, which is not so bad with the blaster, but Comlink, you don't really want to play that early on, so our opponent just has to kind of do more, and also they draw 1 less card. The other time it's good is if you've got a character that's about to die, you can return an upgrade that doesn't have redeploy to your hand and put that elsewhere. But all of those things are pretty minor, and most of the time when we're playing on this, my opponent doesn't activate it, which is exactly what we want. And when we have it, we don't get a plus, but we're only claiming 1 in every 5, 1 in every 6 turns. So we play Mos Eisley Spaceport. And that's the deck. I've been really liking it so far. I'm doing very, very well with it. I think the matchups that it's going to be very good against are the ones where your opponent's on very few dice. The matchups we will struggle against are matchups where our opponents have very good attack faces that they don't have to pay for. Or if our opponents can kind of set up early on us with a lot of upgrades, which is more reason to run more confiscations and disarms. Cool. Other than that, I've spoken about the color choices, the character choices, and everything. But if you'd like to know something, I'll probably be posting this deck list up with this video, so feel free to ask me if there's any cards you want me to try, or if there's cards that you've tried that you think are good, or if you just think I'm very wrong about any of my card choices. Let me know, and I'm sure you will. Anyway, I've been the Swamp King. Thanks for putting up with me being very, very sick, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.